Hi there, I'm Tina Makua. Good day, Sacramento, and thanks for joining us on Facebook Live here. This is Battling Bias. A lot of problems here with Asians and Pacific Islanders. A lot of hate crimes have been reported. So we thought we'd have a discussion, and I invited some local leaders to the Facebook Live discussion here. We're waiting on one more here. So we wanted to hope that you guys tune in throughout this next half hour or so, just to bring awareness to the problem that a lot of us are facing. And I'd like to welcome in, we got Nilda Valmores of My Sister's House, wave there, Josh Kaizuka. He is a local attorney and also co-president of Florin JACL, Japanese American Coalition League, and then Brian Koichi Mizushima. Koichi, nice to see you too. And you do a lot of things here with the Buddhist youth groups there, and of course at your local church too. And we're waiting here on Mai Vang, city councilwoman here that was just elected. So we have a lot of things that we want to discuss today and hope to bring light to our viewers that are watching on Facebook Live, and may do so a little bit later on today if they aren't tuned in right now. So let's talk about some of the things that we've been hearing in the news, such as the mass shooting in Atlanta that left 8 people dead, 6 of them women of Asian descent, and still not sure yet if it was targeted that way. We also have some video too of a San Francisco Chinese woman attacked recently in mid-March on Market Street. And there she defended herself. Her attacker is in his 30s, and he punched her for no reason at all. But she fought back and left him on a gurney to be taken away. Earlier that morning, also in San Francisco, an 83-year-old Asian man was attacked. Also, we have a New York woman that was attacked recently. This last Monday, we got video of 65-year-old Filipino-American woman kicked and stomped by a young man who was recently arrested and charged with a hate crime, an attempted assault as a hate crime. You could see people in the hotel watching. And this is the sad part here. The guy who works there closed the door. He closed the door. That GoFundMe account raised already $172,000 in donations. I know the San Francisco woman, GoFundMe, donated that money to her local community. And last week we had locally, Southside Park, caravan drive out the hate caravan, as you can see here in this video. A lot of people showed up. So let's start out. I want to start out with Josh. You take part in a lot of activities too for the Stop Asian Hate. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about your background and your experience, especially being involved with Florin JACL?
Well, thank you, Tina, for inviting me on this panel on such an important topic. I'm with the Florin chapter of the Japanese American Citizens League. We've been our chapter's been around for 85 years, and we really try to focus on civil and human rights issues. And so when something happens in Sacramento, we join with other organizations as a community to speak out and try to do something about it. And as you've kind of shown with the different stories coming from other areas, it didn't seem like so much was going on in our area until not too long ago, or at least we hadn't heard about.
Right.
And so, the first thing I heard about was some graffiti that was sprayed on a Japanese-sounding restaurant in Sacramento. And then that was in December. And then there were some businesses where windows were broken, but we're really not sure if that was race-based. And then, of course, the big one, I think, that really galvanized our area was the mutilated dead cat that was left over at Mad Butcher Meats.
Right.
And so, I've got to give it to Council Member Mai Vang for immediately speaking out. And I got to tell you that social media really got that incident going.
Right.
And I think it just galvanized our area. And then, of course, like you reported, Atlanta happened. And so I appreciate how this community in Sacramento really comes together when certain types of things happen, especially in our community. And this is a great forum to start talking about what we in the Sacramento area can do. And I know that Council Member Mai Vang, and I see her now.
Okay, yeah, she's joining
really,
us now.
Hi, everyone.
Started to focus on trying to figure out what the city and the community can do to make sure things like this don't happen again. And there's some great ideas floating out there, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit later about things that each one of us can do. But one thing I do want to just shout out right now is really, if you see something, do something. And don't be like those people in New York who watched an elderly woman getting kicked and pummeled and then close the door and not call the police.
Heartbreaking watching that. Yes, Mai Vang just joined us now, Sacramento City Council member. Mai, you there?
I am. I'm here. Hi, Tina. Hi, everyone. I do apologize. I'm late. I was at one of our community churches this morning, assisting with food distribution. Actually, many of the folks that are coming through are actually Southeast Asian and members from our community. And so, you know, handling everything from all fronts. And so I do apologize for being late. I just literally pulled up and just jumped on Zoom. So I'm happy to be here and to be in virtual space with all of you.
Yeah, no worries. You know, Josh was just highlighting about what we can do as a community. We showed some of the videos, San Francisco, New York, you know, a lot of hate crimes reported here. And that's the one thing I think many of us can say here on this panel, including me, that we were taught growing up is just don't say anything. We're very quiet. I believe the Asian community is taught to just be quiet and don't make waves. What do you think, Mai?
Well, I would say, you know, well, one, as you all know, our Asian American community is incredibly diverse. And I will say, you know, in some families, in some Asian families, perhaps they were also taught not to say anything or not to contribute to what's already happening because they wanted for us to keep our head down. But I will also challenge all of us that in some API families, in some Asian American families, we were also taught to speak up and defend ourselves as well, right? And so I think it's really important for even us to think about the ways in which, you know, what could be a norm in one Asian family might not be a norm in another Asian family. I know in my family in particular, there's a reason why my dad taught us martial arts, and it was because he was afraid of us being bullied at school, and making sure that we you know stand up for ourselves. And so what I would say is I think one of the dangers that I think, as many of you all know, the model minority myth that Asian Americans are successful, that they don't experience racism, right? And what it does is unmask the disparities that exist within the Asian American community. And we have to do everything we can to really demystify that myth. I mean, that's one reason why Asian Americans are rendered invisible, or that we're not in the consciousness of America. And I think we are starting to see now that folks are paying attention. And anti-Asian hate isn't something that's new in our communities. It's been, this country has a long and painful and racist history towards Asian Americans. And when you think about just law and legislation, I mean, the very first federal immigration law was the Page Act, which prohibited Chinese women and Asian women to enter the country because this country didn't want Asian Americans to produce, or they saw Asian women as a public health concern, right? And so, which ties into COVID right now, right? What you're seeing, the racist rhetoric from our previous administration that has contributed, I would say, to the uptick in anti-Asian hate. And so there is a lot of work that we have to do, I think, as individuals, as community, and as government entities also have to step up. And we're starting to see that. You know, definitely, you know, I really appreciate the API caucus, Dr. Senator Pan, who chairs the API caucus, shared about what's happening at the state level And then locally here, we did pass a resolution to condemn anti-Asian hate, but that is just the first step. I think, acknowledging the harm and trauma is the first piece, so that folks and elected officials acknowledge there is an issue, there is something happening in the community, and now it's the next step. What are we going to do to truly protect our community and also invest in Asian American communities? Right. And I would say when we talk about racial justice and equity, oftentimes Asian Americans are not part of those conversations. And when we talk about racial justice, we are part of that fabric as well.
Yes, yes. We're looking at video that was shot from last week's caravan here. The solidarity there you see with the sign with Asian communities. I will talk now to Nilda Valmores, the executive director of My Sister's House. Nilda, you've been there for years. I've known you for a long, long time. And you do a lot of work with the women in the Asian community that experience domestic violence. But have any of the women that you work with expressed any fear because of the rise in Asian hate?
Yeah, there has been fear, Tina, that's been expressed along the way from different Asian callers, but we're really more concerned about those that may be so afraid that they're not even calling right now, that they're not reaching out for help. And a lot of this is because of all the rhetoric that's been involved, not just the rhetoric, the actual incidents of crime against Asian women. I think it's like 70% of the incidents of violence against Asians has been incidents involving Asian women, including the Atlanta murders as another example.
Okay, so what are you telling the clients that you have?
Well, we're telling our clients that, still it's important to reach out for help, that the quicker that they reach out for help, the less trauma that they will be experiencing in their lives. That's our belief, that they're doing something, that they'll be doing something positive, they'll be getting resources, and that staying in hurtful situations, that the violence just tends to escalate, just tends to continue and grow. So it's not a better solution, that being courageous and being strong in these difficult times is really important.
Yes, yes. Now also Brian Koichi Mizushima. Koichi, you work with Buddhist Churches of America, and you put out, tell everybody the survey that you were sharing with me yesterday.
Yes, Tina, when you invited me to be on the panel, you asked me to kind of get a sense of what our community is feeling. And as you know, as I mentioned, I work with a lot of the high school age youth in particular. So I just made this real quick Google survey, and I got about 30 responses just in the last 2 days. So obviously this is a topic that is at the forefront of everyone's mind right now. And the one takeaway, there are many takeaways, but one that affected me the most was to see these young people and how affected they've been, not just recently, but in their past experiences, and encountering those racist acts or microaggressions, as they would label it. The thing that I noticed the most about them was that they started to feel a sense of shame of their ethnic background. And that was one of the most heart-wrenching things that I took away from this, really informal brief survey. I found that incredibly heartbreaking.
Did they explain why and give you examples?
Yeah, it was because of things that happened to them during school, racial slurs, not being chosen for specific teams or even roles in plays that they're auditioning for. They would hear these, again, people would make these slanted-eyed motions. They would make these references to them being good at violin and math. And it made them kind of regress, and it made them not want to be proud of who they were. And another friend of mine even said they tried to dress differently and blend in to the different prevailing culture at the time. And in a time, again, dealing with young people, one of the biggest issues right now is they're dealing with finding out their identity.
Right.
And identity is so much more than just race. We're talking about gender and sexuality and all of these challenges. So when you bring out something like your race, which is what you wear on your skin, and if they can't come to terms with that and be good with who they are, man, that is such a heart-wrenching thing for me to hear.
Yeah,
and very revealing.
And then they see all this that's happening in the news.
Absolutely.
And all the problems, in the United States here. Josh, let me go back to you here. So as a group, again, you're the co-president of Florin JACL and a local attorney here. So what is your group going to do for something like Koichi's youth?
Well, I can take some of this back to, during World War II. And actually, as the back to the 19th century. How many people during World War II, the Japanese Americans who were targeted, kind of disinherited their culture? I mean, that's one thing that Koichi was talking about, the youth. I mean, they want to be so American and so like everybody else, they start shunning their heritage. I think that's wrong. And so one of the things that I think we're looking at is to be involved with the city and other community organizations and start spreading news about things that people can do. Because let's face it, 38% of the attacks or incidents happen at businesses. 20% that's happened over the last year happened in public streets and sidewalks. Most of these harassment and incidents are verbal. 66% are verbal harassment, 20% are shunning. Only about 8% really are physical assaults. So that means that a lot of these incidents are happening in public. And think about this, when the schools open up, it's going to be really important that people know what they should do when they see something like this. Mm-hmm. And that's why, I'm trying to get out the word that they really need to start taking bystander intervention training. So when they see something, they can do something. They can do it in a safe manner. If it doesn't seem safe, then there's other alternatives. There's also training on how to respond for people who are harassed. I think these are courses and things that are online and available through www.ihollaback.org. And, I think Nilda knows about the bystander intervention training. This is something that each one of us can take.
Right.
Each kid can take, each adult can take. And it is so important, because if you don't have the tools to respond when you see an incident out in public, you're going to be like those people in New York who just kind of closed the door and didn't do anything. Yeah. And that's absolutely not what you want to do. You want to be able to do something and not be complicit by not doing anything and remaining silent.
Yeah, and here we're looking at the video again where this man is kicking over and over this Filipino woman there, and the hotel people just shut the door.
So. And the thing is, they could have called the police, or they could have gone outside and told the guy, "Hey, stop it." Mm-hmm. And another.
And I get that people are scared to intervene. I get that, that they may get hurt. So then, how do you address that?
So I think another good resource would be going to stopaaphate.org, and they have safety tips in English and like 7 other languages. So when you encounter a situation like that, you know how to respond, because what you want to do is try to get that person who's being harassed or attacked away from the incident. And like I said, most of these incidents, an overwhelming majority, are verbal. People come up to other people and start harassing them. There are techniques to get that person to safety, or even ask people around them for help to try to diffuse the situation, get them away. And if it doesn't look like that's something that's going to work, you can still call the police. So there's a lot of alternatives. People just need to get trained.
Yes. City Councilwoman Mai Vang, let's go back to you, especially when it comes to, the verbal comments made. I mean, how do you address that? Because that's not really a crime, but it's showing hate. So what do you say?
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you so much, Tina, for your question. I think oftentimes, and I think one of the panelists talked about microaggressions, right, that we face daily. And oftentimes hate incidents doesn't arise into hate crime, right? And so there is this hesitancy to why report when it's not going to be considered a hate crime. And I think encouraging community members to report, because if we don't have ways to track it, we can't see patterns and trends. situations. And so making sure that we encourage our communities to be able to report. The other piece is also, I would say, and even when it is reported, even as a councilwoman, I have shared that oftentimes cases are not dealt with a sense of urgency when it impacts Asian Americans. And so at the same time, it's also making sure that we hold institutions accountable to make sure that they are responsive and dealt with a sense of urgency as well. And then I want to go back to the piece about young folks that the panelists mentioned. And thank you so much for doing that survey, because I've been thinking a lot about that, and also speaking with young folks on the ground. I know at Luther Burbank there are healing circles for our Asian American students, and now that we're coming back, I mean, we've been doing distant learning, but schools are slowly opening. We need to think about the social emotional health of our API student, or our Asian American students, who is dealing with all of this, which is one of the reasons why I am such a strong proponent of ethnic studies and Asian American studies, and making sure that not just Asian American students learn about their own history and their own roots, but that that their peers also know about their history, right? And making sure that we have that in our curriculum, that they see their lived experiences and their history reflected in the books. That's really important, so that we don't internalize really poverty, we don't internalize white supremacy, we don't internalize that. I mean, even as a young person, I didn't learn about my own history until I actually went to college and took a course in sociology, because it was a way for my parents not to really share about the trauma during the secret war, right? And so ethnic studies, and making sure that not just Asian Americans understand their history and their roots, but that other students, right, that we should also be learning about Black history as well, and Chicano, and our Latinx and our indigenous communities. That's incredibly important, because at the end of the day, there are things that we can do on an institutional level and a policy level, but on the one-on-one, it's really about the unpacking and learning our own history and our own roots, so that we can begin to really recognize ways in which white supremacy, ways in which it shows up in our lives. And we start that, we got to start it at a young age. We have to be able to do the education piece in our schools, in community spaces, in healing spaces, and hold space for our young people.
Yes, Koichi, maybe you can get together with Maya and share some of the survey results there, and that way she can see what they've written down. I'm sure that, I know that you did it anonymously for them to feel safe,
Yeah, and I did ask for their age ranges and areas too. So, it's not a huge survey, but I would love to definitely share that with you, Mai.
Yeah, and I truly believe, like I agree with you, Mai, that sharing, especially when you're young, is sharing with a friend some experiences that family has gone through. Because I know, like you said, that maybe your family didn't want to talk about some things, and share that, because I think they're so excited that, they're in America now and be Americanized. And I think a lot of people don't know what that means to some Asian cultures when they say, oh, I want you to be Americanized. I didn't want you to learn, like my mom didn't teach me Tagalog, so I only picked up a few words because she wanted me to learn everything here. I mean, did any of you experience that?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. I can speak Hmong and English, but I think for my parents, they wanted us to succeed, right? And they want us to learn English, and that was their focus, right? And so yeah, I mean, I think very similar experience growing up, for sure. I mean, we spoke Hmong and English at home, but for my parents who didn't have a college education, they did everything they can. Even my mom, I remember her giving me a newspaper, and at the time she didn't know how to teach me, but she would say, go circle all the, and in this article. So I would look in the article and I would circle all the and. She's like, after I'm done with that, she's like, go circle all the thes, THEs, right? For her ways to teach me English, that was her way of teaching me English. Yeah. But even at a young age, I think that, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, so Nilda, let me go back to you at my sister's house. How are you going to move forward now with the people that you work with?
Well, we're going to continue doing the work that we do in terms of educating and preventing. I wanted to say that, I think that a lot of the work not only has to do about understanding our history, but also understanding the role of relationships and what's a healthy and what's an unhealthy relationship. And I think all of us need to have those discussions, and even at various ages, right? And to understand, like, what's the, for lack of a better term, the power and the control. When you were asking about Americanization, I was thinking of growing up, and I was thinking, remembering my grandmother telling me, like, you know, to be a good wife, I had to be a submissive wife, and I had to accept whatever my husband said or did to me. And a few years ago, I remember receiving an award from PNDA, and there was a young woman who said the same thing decades later that her grandmother was currently had said to her. And I thought, like, okay, things haven't changed still. You know, things have changed a lot, but there's still a lot of work that we have to do in our communities in terms of thinking about what does being Americanized mean? What does being in a healthy relationship mean?
Okay. All right. Nilda, how do people get a hold of you for My Sister's House?
They can call us on our crisis line at 916-428-3271.
One more time.
We're open 24/7. And if they need special language assistance, they just have to tell us their language and pick up the phone when we call back with an interpreter.
Say the number one more time.
916-428-3271.
Okay, and then
Thanks,
Josh, if people want to get involved with you, Florin JACL.
Well, they can go to our website and they can email Florin JACL at Florin JACL SV, V as in Victor, at gmail.com.
Okay.
And on our website, which is at florinjacl.com, I believe, there's a link to email me directly.
Okay.
So, you know, anybody have questions or, you know, an organization, well, we already work with a lot of organizations locally.
Yes, yes.
So I know that the Myvang and, you know, other city people are working on addressing and looking at these issues, and I'm certainly going to be helping with that. So,
okay.
Yes, and Tina, I did want to share, you know, my council office and my team is working to put together a meeting just with community, API community, Asian American community leaders and residents on some next steps.
Okay.
You know, I like to share, you know, one of a community activist that I really look up to is Grace Lee Boggs, and you know, one thing she says is, you know, the only way to survive is by making sure we are taking care of one another, right? Racism is truly a complex and multifaceted issue, and there are critical steps that we must take. One, I think the solution is within the community. Communities are not waiting around; they're already stepping up to figure out how we are going to protect our communities and how are we going to fight for investment in our communities. So I'm incredibly proud of folks not waiting for local government to stepping up, but at the same time, want to make sure that on the policy level and on the engagement level on the ground that we're in coordination. And so we will be planning a meeting with Asian American residents and leaders to discuss next step, because it's really important, one, to make sure that we look at all solutions on the table and not just saying, hey, we need increased law enforcement, right? Because what kind of investments do we have? I mean, when I think about My Sister's House, right? Mental and social emotional support and health services, we got to invest in CBOs and communities on the ground already doing this work. And when I think about community safety and health, I think about neighborhoods that have access to abundance of resources and opportunities. That's what we should be fighting for. And so on our end, I want to make sure that any type of solutions that's proposed by the city actually comes from ground up. That's what needs to happen, is that our communities do have the answers and the solution. Elected official like myself and my colleagues and the mayor needs to listen to these community transformative solutions. And so I really look forward to working with our Asian American leaders and residents and organizers and activists on the ground who have the answer. We just have to make sure we have the political will to invest so that we can truly protect all of our communities.
Okay, and I hope, Koichi, you're going to be contacting Mai now to share the survey that you did.
Absolutely. You know, Tina, can I just add one
Yes,
thing too?
please.
In the, you know, as we talk about these really important issues on the panel, one thing that I just wanted to convey was I wanted us to also remember and focus upon all of the wonderful and amazing people in our lives that are non-Asian American,
Yes.
that have been a part of our lives and that have been supportive. You know, I didn't want people out there to think that we all gather around and it's all this negative energy, because we are, and I'm sure I speak for all the panelists, I'm sure we are surrounded by amazing non-Asian co-workers, colleagues, friends, neighbors, community members. And this, I am choosing to look at this violence and hate as a minority group. That's how I'm looking at it. It is the minority, and that's who we are going to get rid of through education, through our strength of will, and us coming together. And as Mai said, coming together with all communities, all minority groups, all different groups.
Yes.
And I just really wanted to put that point out there, you know, that we do appreciate.
I love that you did. We got to do it together, right? No matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't talk about anti-Asian hate and incident without talking about anti-Blackness and BLM. All of that is interwoven and interconnected. And so, if anything, I actually have seen, I mean, over the years, you know, solidarity between the Black and the Asian community. I think it's important to highlight that, because oftentimes, even stories of solidarity is erased from our history books and in our consciousness, right? I think about Yuri Kochiyama, who fought alongside Malcolm X. I think about Black Americans who fought for the entry of Southeast Asian refugees after the Vietnam War. I think about Douglas, who, you know, was fighting against the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act when the Black community, the African American community, was dealing with slavery, right? So we have a long history of solidarity, but it's not uplifted, and there's an intentional erasure. And so that's how solidarity is there, and we'll continue to do work because we're all in this together.
Well, you know, by all of you participating today, you know, in this Facebook Live conversation and discussion, I hope that's a little step closer to those that are watching to understand that, you know, that we're all people and humans, and we just want to be all treated equally. So I always tell myself, I say, I close my eyes, and if we all close our eyes, you know what? We don't see color. We just hear sounds, and hopefully it's of love. And that's what my goal is, right? And I know that it is for you too. Thank you all so much. I want to acknowledge you one more time here before we say goodbye. And the bottom left is Nilda Valmores from My Sister's House. And the top left is Brian Koichi Mizushima. Koichi, thank you so much for joining. And on top right, Josh Kaizuka again, co-president Floor and JACL, and also an attorney, local attorney, and of course, City Councilwoman Mai Vang there on the bottom right with her college hat on. We thank you so much, and I wish you peace and a lot of happiness, and let's keep on doing this together, all right?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for bringing us together.
And
Thank
thanks
you.
everybody for joining us on Facebook Live here, and we hope you walk away with something that you can share with your family and your friends, and feel free to email me if you have any questions. All right, thank you again for tuning in always to Good Day Sacramento. Bye-bye.